Welcome back to another exciting installment of Southern Cross Shakespeare. Today I will discuss the last remaining play of the great bard's work I've performed in for a theatre company here in Australia. Unfortunately, my experience with this company was not the greatest, and I will explain why later during this podcast. Let's just stick to the facts for the time being, shall we? This was the smallest part I played in a Shakespeare play, but like I said before in my first podcast, there are no small parts, only small actors. In this production of Antony and Cleopatra, I performed a combination of two characters, amalgamated into one, which often happens in amateur plays, which often happens in amateur theatre companies. These were Agrippa and Dolabella, who were both soldiers for Caesar's army. So meshing these two characters together was suitable for the text. The play was cut back due to the Christian religious beliefs attached to the company that I was working with. However, as an actor, you are told never to judge the text or the character. This, I believe, to a certain extent, to be true. If you decide to take a piece of work, then you must dedicate yourself wholly to that work without judgment or bias. If, however, you don't believe in the text, or your own personal beliefs or feelings will affect your interpretation of that work, then don't attach yourself to the project in the first place. No matter how desperate you may feel emotionally or financially to perform, as it will cheapen you as an actor and as a person, ruining your brand, which is highly important as an actor and a production company. A subject I will discuss in another podcast. I'm saying this also to theatre companies, production houses, and movie studios as well. Because if you don't, audiences will reject your ideas. Remember, the customer is always right. What this theatre company did was a precursor to what I see happening today to many historical texts written by dead white men, whereby they take the works of these giants of literature like Shakespeare or Tolkien and change it to fit their narrative for the modern era. The problem is that you can't do that. It is not your work, nor will it ever be your work to tamper with to fit with your ideology and spew forth your lies and propaganda, whether that be those of religious zealotry or political bias. Just because their worldview is different from yours, as they lived and worked in different times, does not mean you can tamper with it. They put the hours in, not you. Oh, and if you do create new work that suits your ideology and that fails too, then don't complain about that either. So what this company did was just as bad as what woke production companies are doing right now, by race and gender swapping characters today to fit their narrative and brainwash people in order to groom them in. So what this company did was just as bad as what woke production companies are doing right now, by race and gender swapping characters today to fit their narrative and brainwash people in order to groom them to fit their ideologies. What's wrong with race swapping white characters to black ones, you may ask? Well, it suggests that in order for one race to succeed, it must do that by sitting on the shoulders of another one, instead of succeeding independently on its own. This is why characters like Black Panther and Blade work, and Falcon as Captain America does not. This company did the opposite. It gutted the play of all violence and sexuality because of their overt religious zealotry, and thus the play lost all meaning and context in its purpose to tell a story and teach a lesson that overt sexuality and violence for sex and violence sake is wrong. In fact, there was no purpose to the story at all. No one understood the message in our interpretation of the play. Don't get me wrong, sex and violence are beautiful and necessary things respectively, if used properly. But just because you may be offended by using overt representations of these things to teach a lesson does not mean you get to gut the play of these things. On the flip side, modern day cinema and plays should not use sex and violence for sex and violence sake just to make a quick buck. They should be used interwoven to the story to teach us a lesson that too much of either is never a good thing, because like any addiction, it corrupts the soul and destroys us as a people. Don't believe me? Watch Shame starring Michael Fassbender and you will see. But be warned, it's quite confronting. So, like I said, if you feel like the message that a company you are working for or going to work for is trying to teach is wrong, then walk away, no matter how hard it is for you to say no to an opportunity or a paycheck. However, on the flip side of this, if it is a terrific script but the character has irredeemable positive characteristics that will better society as a whole, but don't mesh with your ideological beliefs because you have been brainwashed by far left ideologues all your life, then you must take on that piece of work. For example, when I was playing Macduff in Macbeth, I had to do the sign of the cross at one point because he is a deeply religious and spiritual man. But at the time, I was an atheist, so it was very difficult to do. It made me feel physically ill actually to do it, but deep down I knew it was the right message to send to my audience, and it worked. On the other hand, if I ever see a script in the future that comes my way that depicts straight white males as evil or stupid again, I'm going to fuck it off, because this message has been spewed far too much for far too long by far left ideologues and is harming young men beyond repair. I should know, I've been there. Never forget that it is your right to say no, and if you are locked in a contract with a production company that you feel the same way about, get yourself out of that situation by any means necessary. You are not doing yourself or society as a whole any favours by staying put. You will only make yourself sick and in the long run ruin society and make it sick as a whole. I was too young and naive at the time to realise this, but at the end of the day, it is only a performance and I walked away from during the actual run of the production. Antony and Cleopatra is another one of Shakespeare's tragedies. I know I seem to be attached to tragedies all the time. One of these days I must perform in one of his comedies. Did you know that the singular most important context that marks the difference between these two categories, besides the overall mood, is their endings? Comedies tend to end with multiple weddings, whereas tragedies tend to end with multiple deaths. The Tempest has neither, although it is implied that Miranda will marry Ferdinand. But it does not happen during the course of the play, which is what makes this last play of his so unique. There is, of course, a third category of Shakespeare's plays, the histories, which for all intents and purposes are actually biographical plays about the people they are based on and the events surrounding their lives, like Henry V. I don't know much about the histories as they have never appealed to me, but they are a part of his canon and many of them are of significant importance as they help us to understand how to write historical dramas for films these days. But I probably won't analyse any of his histories in these podcasts. That's not to say I won't cover important elements of them that I find interesting, such as the St. Crispin's Day speech in Henry V, but not the whole text. In this podcast, I won't go into a deep analysis of what Antony and Cleopatra is about, as most of you should already know the history of the love story between these two historical and iconic figures. In brief, however, two powerful people from two powerful empires fall in love, but love and power combined is a tricky tightrope to traverse. So let's just say their relationship was doomed from the beginning. Antony and Cleopatra explores the massive theme of love and loyalty to oneself and one's duty. Here we have two powerful yet flawed people who are bound by birth and circumstances to their countries and to their countrymen's success and their desire for each other. Unfortunately, they can't have both, and this is their undoing. Because if they can't have both, then neither of them wants either, as they are both so selfish, narcissistic, and self-absorbed that they lack conviction in anything they do, and this is their ultimate undoing. These themes can be seen in the ideological progressive far left movement of wokeness in today's society. Don't get me wrong, Being a Christian zealot or any other type of religious ideological zealots is wrong. Trying to force your belief down anybody else's throat is straight out evil. I believe in taking personal responsibility and accountability for your own actions. That is not to say you should not fight to defend your beliefs to protect yourself and your family, but you should never be forced to kneel for anyone or any human cause. The only entity you should bow down before is God, not man. In saying that, I said should, not must, just to clarify, so that you don't accuse me of being a hypocrite. Like Vin Diesel says in the Chronicles of Riddick, I kneel before no man. For all the negative experiences I had centered around this one play and its production, I would not trade this in for anything in the world, for it gave me two positive results. Firstly, it taught me to be humble and accept a part that was small, because even though I would have liked to have played a much larger role, for all the negative experiences I had centered around this one play and its production, I would not trade this in for anything in the world, for it gave me two positive results. Firstly, it taught me to be humble and accept a part that was small, because even though I would have liked to have played a much larger role, younger and first-time actors should learn to accept that they have to start somewhere, unless they are extremely talented or lucky. And secondly, to be aware of getting involved with any company or studio that has massive red flags that don't gel with my beliefs or worldview. I know that these two lessons seem to counterpoint each other, and there is the old expression, beggars can't be choosers. I know that these two lessons seem to counterpoint each other, and there is the old expression, beggars can't be choosers. But in all honesty, there will always be other projects, other companies, and other studios you can approach and work with, and this is where you get your start with supporting roles. Some of the conservative production studios I'm liking the look of in the United States is the Daily Wire production house, headed by Ben Shapiro, who have already made two films, one of which is Run, Hide, Fight, and Epic Verse Studios that have yet to produce anything. And of the big production houses that I still favour, Sony still seems to be producing material that is purely entertaining and not woke. And hey, if you don't like the current established corporations, why not start your own, wherever you are in the world? Join me next time where I will discuss King Lear, the play I studied at RADA in the summer of 2002. Until then, remember, in time we hate that which we often fear.